Heloise, thank you so much for joining us on the Ladies Finance Club podcast. We're very excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Molly. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So jumping straight into it, tell us about yourself and I guess where you grew up.
So I'm originally from South Africa. I grew up in Cape Town and I had one sibling, an elder brother, which means I was always playing with cars and ended up going to study engineering, nothing to do with finance, but came to the UK 10 years ago. And I was supposed to stay for 1 year, but I fell in love with the good British weather, I suppose.
Yes, sounds like me. I went for 2 years and stayed for 6. But I guess, when did you first get into investing and what was kind of like the motivation behind that?
Yeah, so when I think back about it, I think my mum, even though she doesn't come from a finance background, she was always trying to gamify it for us. I think as an adult, looking back at it now, I actually think she was trying to get out of paying us pocket money, because she used to sort of like make us do a budget and then an income and expense sheet in order to get our monthly pocket money. But I think she was just trying to get out of paying us. But it was good fun, and part of that we had to invest a little bit of money. It was all play. But it wasn't until 2016, when I was a mature student, I came back to do a PhD. And so I was really worried about not having a pension. And that's really when I started investing more proactively and bought my first individual stock on eToro.
Great. And do you remember what that stock was and what made you want to choose it?
Oh yeah, I've talked about it a lot because I have a lot of regrets about it. So I started where nobody should start. It wasn't a stock, it was oil. So I traded commodities, partly because it was fluctuating a lot. So I felt I wanted to have that quick learning feedback. But if you look at my eToro performance, it's like a steep downward curve until I realized what I was doing and fortunately corrected.
Awesome. And I guess as you were building your knowledge in investing, where were you going to learn about it and educating yourself?
Yeah, so the landscape back then looked very different to what it does now. I started by just getting hands-on experience. I love to learn by doing. So eToro has a virtual account, which allowed me to sort of play, but I very quickly realized that I have to put real money in order to manage that emotion that comes with being in the stock market. And so, I was learning sort of on the job, but also falling back to a lot of the classical reading or books about, investing. So Value Investor, all the kind of classical books was sort of where I learned a lot of the basics.
Yeah, because I think as well, sometimes with what I hear is people just want to know it. And I'm like, you have to educate yourself. You have to put in the time. You have to read the books. You've got to do it to actually learn it. So you've had an average return of nearly 30%. And for those who are like, what does that mean? The S&P 500 has an average return of 10%. So S&P 500 being top 500 companies in America. So that's pretty impressive, 30%. Do you have like a secret sauce or a strategy for kind of your like success here?
I wish there was a secret sauce, but I don't really think there is. I think it's just my followers and copiers who know me know that my mantra is patience and discipline. So it's the good old classical, compound interest over the long term, reinvesting your profits. And then I do have a little bit of I have my 6 pillars that I use as part of my strategy. The 3 main ones being what I call the basics. So that's doing my fundamental analysis, managing my risk, and then reinvesting my interest or my profits. And then there's the second layer, which I call uniquely me. And that's the one I sort of encourage people to look for when they do want to start investing. So for me, I have a background in machine learning. I didn't know anything about using technical analysis when I first started investing, but I did have machine learning as a tool to look at data. And so even though that's very fashionable now, it was my way of sort of knowing how to analyze data. And I always encourage people to link back to having that one thing that is your kind of superpower or something that gets you really excited. For some people, it's just buying things they know, buying from companies that they use every day. So I think that's the secret to making sure that you have a good portfolio.
Absolutely. And is there anything in particular you look into, like a company, they've got to have certain things for you to invest in them?
Yeah, so I have over the last almost 10 years now really worked through my strategy and kind of worked out the nuts and bolts. So I, as I mentioned, use a lot of machine learning in my analysis. So I start by funneling down companies that I think I should take a closer look at, because going through their company reports or doing an in-depth analysis of a single company can be quite time intensive. And so where do you even begin? And so I just sort of use my the tools that I have to narrow those down. And then I would, once I have looked at, done my due diligence, whether a company is a healthy company, whether the books make sense. The most important thing I think that a lot of people overlook is where does that company fit into your portfolio? So by simply, for example, adding more tech stocks or adding more healthcare stocks, you're not necessarily diversifying your portfolio. So I think the most important thing for me is usually how does that company, even if it is a good buy, does it fit into my specific strategy? Does it meet my risk demands? And does it give me good diversification across different geographies, across different sectors? And yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome. And you mentioned before you're a copy trader. Can you just explain to our listeners what that means?
Yeah, so copy trading is unique to eToro. It allows anybody to copy your entire portfolio without any fees to the copier. And the platform essentially mimics in the same proportion as my portfolio your investment. So you don't necessarily have to have the same amount as me. You could have any amount, but they would then automatically buy the stocks as I am buying or selling the stocks.
Great. And what kind of trends do you think we're going to see? You've studied machine learning. Do you think AI and machine learning are going to change the way that we invest in the future?
Yeah, I think they're definitely already starting to. I am very excited about the movement that we've seen about retail investors coming into the market. I think podcasts like this are great for disseminating information. I wish there was something like this when I started. And I really hope that we continue to see that strong participation from the retail investor in the capital market. So retail investors, just me or you, individual investors who are buying stocks. And something like AI would definitely be supporting individual investors to require fewer resources to make better decisions. And that's essentially the most important thing for investing, is to make sure that you won't always get all your decisions right, but you want to make sure that you get more decisions right than you get wrong to ensure that you're profitable at the end of the day.
And I guess, what are some common mistakes you see people make? You mentioned one before, but are there any other common mistakes you see people make and you're like, I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they would do this.
I think the most crucial one, and it's the one that I made in the beginning as well, and some people just unfortunately never seem to, learn from their mistakes, but it's letting their emotions guide their investment decisions. I think that's one of the things a lot of investors struggle with the most, and that's if you have a investment strategy, it can be really tempting to deviate from that, especially when the markets are really volatile as they are currently. I mean, we had the bear market last year, and I'm seeing a lot of copiers and investors on eToro drawing out their money, which is such a shame because it's almost like the opposite thing that you want to be doing. It's almost like, if there's a good sale, why would you be running away from it? So people often let those emotions influence their decisions, and that's a really hard thing for new and old investors to master, because the market is always changing and keeping us on our toes.
Yeah. And do you have a favorite company that you absolutely love and you will always kind of hold on to? Or again, does it depend on the current environment?
Yeah, I think it's pretty dependent on the current environment. My strategy on eToro was originally focused only on tech and healthcare because I did biomedical engineering, and so that was the sector that I knew and understood. And so it was important for me, after burning my fingers with oil, to stay with something that I could make sense of. Of course, that has changed a lot over the last few years as I have become more mature as an investor, as I understand the stock market a lot better. I tend to feel more comfortable with including other sectors in the portfolio, and that's also become necessary because despite having a really good return on eToro, one of the things my strategy does aim to have is a fairly low to moderate risk score. And so kind of managing that return with the risk for myself and my copiers is something that's really important. And at the moment, with the economy and the markets as they are, it is a daily sort of challenge to make sure that the portfolio remains relevant.
Awesome. And how often do you spend in a week on your investment portfolio?
Yeah, it's very different for me now than when I first started. When I started my portfolio on eToro, I had a full-time job. And so it was really something that I would do in the evenings. I was on there every evening after work. It was a bit easier because in the UK, the markets are still open in the evenings. But it was something that I was really obsessed with. Of course, now for the last year, I've been a full-time popular investor on eToro, so I do this full-time now. So it's basically all day, every day, making sure I stay on top of the markets.
Awesome. And what was the best piece of investing advice you've ever received?
I would say to just get started. I think it took me a really long time from when I understood what compound interest means and what the value of investing is. It was probably almost like a 10-year gap from understanding that to making my first investment in my first individual stock. And my only regret is that I didn't make that sooner, because I was waiting for this sort of perfect moment when I had the right amount or the right stock or the right basket of stocks, or for a long time I just struggled to find the right platform. And so I would say to just get started and know that not all your investments will work out the way you want, but time in the market is way more important than timing the market.
Great. I completely agree. And I know with some of our listeners, they get analysis paralysis. They kind of go, oh, what platform, which company or ETF or index fund, and they just delay. And that actually costs them in the long term. Do you have any favorite podcasts or books that you would recommend, especially for maybe our listeners who are kind of starting their investing journey?
Yeah, one of the books I read a few years ago, which really, I keep talking about it. It's one of my favorite books now. It's Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money. And the reason I love it so much is because it's not a typical investing book, but it is an investing book. And I think it really changed my whole outlook and awareness of the biases that I bring to my money, how I grew up, the country I grew up in, the people I surround myself with. All of those things influence the decisions that we make, and all of those micro decisions compound when it comes to our finances. And so that for me was a really powerful book. If anybody who doesn't want to get into the weeds of investing, I would recommend that book.
I absolutely loved that book, and I actually listened to the audio book as well. So for any listeners who are in Australia and you want to listen to it for free, download BorrowBox, which is a free all you need is a library card number in Australia, and you can either listen to the audio book or download the ebook for free. Well, thank you for that hot book tip. And any podcasts that you love? Obviously, present company accepted.
Obviously. Yeah, I do listen to your podcast. I also quite like the eToro Invest and Digest. I think it's a really good, yeah, I just like listening to it. I think they do a good analysis of some of the stocks, but also the market as well. So I would recommend that one to listeners.
Awesome. And I think we've probably covered this question, but what's your favorite investing platform and why?
Yeah, I get that question so much. I had that in the last interview as well, and it's really timely because, as I said, I joined eToro in 2016 and have now since built my business on there. But at the end of last year, I did another deep dive into how the landscape has changed and tried out a bunch of other platforms, sorry. And eToro is still my favorite because of how user-friendly it is for me. And the fact also that they don't have, high fees. I think that's really important. We often forget, even though compound interest can be so powerful, compounding of fees can also really nibble into your returns. So it's something that people really need to look out for. And talking about wasting time getting started, I think one of my regrets was I joined another platform before eToro because it was rated one of the most popular in the UK at the time. And I just didn't like it. I just didn't use it, and probably ended up wasting about a year trying to force myself onto this platform. Almost thought that investing wasn't for me, but thankfully realized that it was just the platform and not the whole experience. So whatever the platform is, I would say it should be one that you feel comfortable using, because sometimes these things can take a lot of energy to get the momentum going, and you really don't want to lose that momentum once you've started your investing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always think try before you buy. A lot of these platforms allow you to create an account, so you can actually create an account, have a look on the inside and work out exactly which one is for you, because we're all different. So we're all going to have different thoughts and opinions on this, and what works for one person might not work for the next person. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all your knowledge. And if people want to check you out, where can they go?
Yeah, so people can find me on social media. My handle is at Greeff Invest, GREEFF Invest. Or they can find me on eToro. You'll probably find me through eToro because all the links are there. And my handle on eToro is RubyMZA. I can share the link so people can find me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for having me, Molly.